Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, creeds, types, sexual preferences and sexes in general. I'm Alone in Finland, this is EVE Online, and we have a little bit of an interesting update going on, so I'm going to go through it, break it down and give some opinions, some feedback, possibly, not exactly feedback, but also talk about it in general in reference to a few other things that are going on. Now what's happened is, if I just drag this across here, we have a letter from the directors that has come out that is a sort of general framework for what they're going to be doing for the next year and possibly beyond. It's very interesting. There's also a little bit of it that's very telling, so I'm sort of going to go through it fairly quickly in reference to what they're saying, but also what I think may have prompted it and where it may end up, because there are some very interesting parts. Now, as we go through it, and this is on the EVE launcher, you can click on it, it's in that little top left button thing that flashes between propaganda things. However, as they're saying, they're basically saying they're looking ahead, they're going to be talking about it, but also acknowledging what's come behind. And I think the biggest part of that was actually when they threw in a little side effect to that mining redistribution and discovered that that little side effect, those couple extra ships, brought a whole load of players back, changed how a whole load of people played the game, so that for the first time in probably a decade, we started to see mining fleets in HiSec that were comprised of various different people, where people were warping to the belts and other strangers were just inviting them to fleet, not to gank them or anything nasty, but to actually bring that community back and give some boosts and help them out. That is something that existed in the very beginning and it got lost because the aforementioned stuff to do with ganking and where it came in. By the way, there's been a lot of people in my comments, and they are actually in the minority of EVE, but there is a lot of people that have sort of been talking about this ganking culture and how it's always existed in EVE. It's fucking horseshit, complete horseshit, and it always has been. The ability to do it has always been there, but it didn't kick off until the alpha accounts got introduced, because when EVE first started, there wasn't the ability physically on the computers to run that many clients, to run 20 clients at the same time, because you were hitting hardware limitations. And this is coming from somebody who started playing EVE with the best system money could buy at that time. For those of you that don't know, Alienware, before it was part of Dell, used to get access to very specific upgraded graphics cards, so that if you had one of their graphics cards, it was tweaked so that it had more memory than anything else on the market. So with the fastest processor and the fastest graphics card that Alienware provided, you were running the best system money could buy, and I happen to have one of those. So when I was running, I could run 4 or 5 clients, but they would become unstable. You could push it further, you could run 6 or 8 if you wanted to, but it would become very unstable and it would crash constantly. So when they are sort of talking about that in reference to ganking, because I know that this particular chunk of the community is very vocal and this has always been, but it hasn't. Now, one that's often forgot about previous to the whole alpha ganking thing was actually there was another problem with ganking before that. I believe it was about 2008, 2009, as computer power started to allow multiple accounts. And the action that was taken against that by CCP across the board was to double everybody's hull structure, armor and shield points to extend the duration of a fight, because they never had the intention that somebody would be able to pop another player in one hit, especially one person using multiple accounts. So this was taken to lengthen that out, and it was actually talked about again after or sort of during the alpha account point. But a lot of people, especially people that had the ear of the developers, said that they didn't like that idea. Now, a lot of them were connected with some very big alliances whose alts were the ones doing the fucking ganking. So that bias might have actually shifted, especially of recent, with some interesting developments in the whole alliance structure. But that is something that they are now paying attention to, because they are, aside from being aware of what players want, they have also seen how many players distrust the CSM and the bias that the CSM has. For a good example of this being Pirate Software, who famously has made a video a while back about how much he dislikes it. Even though he was on the CSM, he was advocating for a lot of the stuff that he later went, oh no, this was bollocks. It's because a lot of the people that are doing that are the people that have the amount of time to put into it. They are not your Joe Blogs average player. So back to it. that also caused a lot of side effects that were actually just community side effects, not just people leaving and stuff like this, but the way that people operated. Because when I started, it was not unusual to go and do some mining and to have somebody invite you to fleet to get a little bit of boosts off of them, to be that sort of community effort. Even if you weren't turning over your ore or anything like that, even if they weren't part of your corp, this was something that was more community driven in the beginning, and that got killed for years, and it's come back in a big way. And this is something that I think that they've taken attention of, because a lot of people are talking about this in general. It's not just myself that have noticed that this has actually brought some of the community back to the game. The old sort of Evism of it being a bastard simulator, it started as a joke, much the same as the phrase, "This is Eve." But it then became true in the same way that This Is Eve became that toxic answer to somebody justifying bad gameplay or poor gameplay. That sort of, well, I can do it, so I should. Yeah, no, that's not how this works. And in reference to other things, bear in mind that CCP as a company is now building another game. They are building Vanguard, and as has happened, and if you haven't watched my videos on Arc Raiders, please go and watch them, because this will explain a lot. I know a lot of my viewers are not really interested in that. However, it is core to understand what's going to be happening in Eve, because with Vanguard being built and with them looking at the one of the key people, one of the key groups that have been making a similar game that has released, and all of a sudden Arc Raiders has made more in the last 6 months than CCP has made in the last 10 years. That's significant, that amount of income. And Arc Raiders' income is accelerating because of how many people are enjoying this game. They have sort of, to TLDR the other video, they have made it so that the safe space is quite safe, the dangerous space is quite dangerous. The safe space isn't truly safe, and the dangerous place can still have those safe aspects to it, which is representative of Eve as a whole. But they have done it in a way that a lot of players are responding very positively to it. So it's something that would transfer into Vanguard, but it's also something that would transfer into EVE Online. And I think that some of the changes that are going to come are going to reflect that, because if you've got a game out there doing the same sort of blueprint for what you're doing, and they have done it so well as to surpass what you've managed to make in a decade in 6 months, then you're gonna be paying attention to it. Now, when it comes to the actual stuff that's going on, we have the expansions. What they've said, there's going to be a couple of expansions that are going on, but instead of the typical design philosophy of CCP being throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, it's going to be sort of built upon and going forward. We'll see how well that sort of comes together, because CCP has talked about this in the past more than once, and it's kind of fallen on its arse a few times because of, I can imagine, running out of ideas or making an expansion that players don't like. You want to keep it flexible, but they are sort of thinking long term, and it looks like they are thinking about more than where they typically force things. Now, they're going to mention, and I'll go through this, but they are going to mention about expanding faction warfare, and I want to put this out there because somebody in my comments had what I think is the greatest idea. People that watch me know that I am not a big fan of the fact that high sec can take on low sec things, low sec properties where you can be attacked and all of that jazz, and it shuts down main trade routes and all of that jazz. However, somebody came out with something that I think is a better balance point, and to expand on their thing, they had said, what about taking low sec areas and having players fight to put them in high sec as well? So the exact same mechanic, just in reverse, low sec to high sec as well as high sec to low sec. And in my brain I thought that's genius, but also what if you did it on the main trade routes? So Jita to Hek, Jita going down to Amar space, there's a couple of little choke points there, so that you could get high sec players interested in fucking over the people that are normally attacking them, so that you could turn their stuff high sec for a short amount of time in the same way that the low sec to high sec works, and then you could actually pull in more combat from the high sec focused players because it's a reward for them, and they are a lot bigger in number than you've got for the low sec. So you are doing the CCP thing of driving combat, you are doing something that rewards the players because you'd be able to shift a whole load of stuff very quickly in the time that it became high sec. You might also be rewarding the gankers because they've got a new place to set up, but also shifting their focus, because all of a sudden if the pipeline between Jita and Hek becomes high sec for a short amount of time, then the guys that are sat in Udema have no work because nobody's going to go that way. So they would be forced to move to maintain their stuff. So it would be a shake-up of all sorts of things, but also it would be a driving combat thing as well. So I think that was a fantastic fucking idea, and I just want to throw it out there because it is that way of, you're not forcing anybody to fight, but you're given an option with a really high payout. Not just in terms of what would be going on in the actual faction warfare, but you could save a hell of a lot of time. You could move a whole load of stuff very quickly. You could do relocations or transport routes. And this is something that I think, I'm not sure whether this is going to come out, but I think pushing the driving aspect, because CCP understandably is very focused on the combat, but they're not focused on the war. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, the whole Russian thing is a perfect example of how you fuck this up. Russia going into Ukraine, that is. The main aspect for a fighting force is not actually the projection of damage, it is the supply lines behind that damage. You need to be supplied with stuff to maintain a campaign at distance. And if you don't know the history within Russia, when Vladimir Putin came in, he basically passed off all of the logistics to the gangsters in the country. He privatized it so that it wouldn't be military, because he was trying to consolidate stuff and all that jazz. But he actually handed it over to the gangsters, who were just selling a whole load of stuff off and doing black market deals. And that's why in the first couple of days of the whole Ukraine conflict, tanks were running out of diesel and could not get to where they needed to go, and they were being towed away by Ukrainian farmers, because it's one thing to have a fighting force, it's another thing to put that fighting force where you need to be. And when it comes to CCP, that's something that they have sort of neglected in the past, and actually nerfed really badly at one point when they limited the projection of jump things from Titans and stuff like this, jump bridging. They actually nerfed it quite severely, and it didn't really recover after that because people couldn't project at distance, and that lack of projection caused a lot of problems. And also the nerfing of posses sort of brought this in as well. So it's something to do with rebuilding that ability to project damage at space, at distance, might be an idea. But also when you're talking about faction warfare is very much boom and boom, as opposed to having the logistics behind it to support this, because that's a place where you could put in missioning. Especially the logistics missions are kind of a thing that just sits there and they haven't been looked at in a while. I myself don't know much about them because they've not really changed since I came into the game 20 years ago, but it is something where you could be creating a logistics link that people could feed into, especially with the new missioning and the new contracts and things like this, that you could be putting that out there for people to not just fight the stuff, but also the ones that don't want to take part in the fighting might be incentivized to sort of project that logistics thing forward as well. So that's something that could be quite interesting. So here's what we've got the theatres of war, which are not limited to the front lines now of low security space. They are sort of felt across high sec and low sec alike. That, in my opinion, isn't a great thing, but balancing it would be a good idea. And then we've got the sort of player corporations should create opportunities in playstyles to contribute. Now, in my mind, also having not just player corporations, but just having the standard faction warfare corporations do things like this would actually be a better way of doing it, because of the way that you can drop into and out of faction warfare. You're incentivizing people to do it, but if they want to go and run a logistics thing with their main character, they can drop out of faction warfare, do that for a day or two, and then come back. Whereas if a whole corporation is going in, you're attached to it for the time, and that's where you start talking about you need multiple accounts to do this. So having it drop in and drop out makes it more incentivized for the single player, as opposed to you're going to need to run multiple accounts to run Eve, which is the biggest criticism that comes of Eve after the problem with gankers, is that people feel like they can't play the game without multiple accounts. And a lot of us have multiple accounts. The average that they said at one point for CCP was that every person, this I think was 2023 they said this, every person has an average of 2.3 accounts. However, if you bear in mind that the people with multiple accounts have lots of them, you can have gankers that have 10 to 20 accounts, then that means that there are still a lot of people with just one account, and that's how all of us start. So disincentivizing people by sort of making you locked into something if you start it is where you need to address, in my opinion. Now, an example of this in real time is faction warfare when it comes to Triglavians. If you want to side with the Triglavians and move into Poshvin, then you're kind of stuck doing that, because gaining standings towards the Triglavians means that you get lower standings for the most part. I know there are other ways around about it, but if you want to go heavy Triglavian, you're limited against Edencom, which means you can become a target in high-sec, especially in particular high-sec systems, when Edencom comes in, where bots will naturally attack you. This is something that comes in if you're running pure faction warfare for one side, and all of a sudden you become enemy to another side, another faction. So your standings, it takes a lot of work to level those things out. Speaking as somebody who plays, that does an awful lot of missioning and a lot of faction warfare, where I jump between sides because I want a faction warfare experience, but I'm not linked to any particular ideology. So in my play, I play to balance out those faction standings so that I make sure my player character doesn't get screwed and linked into one particular area. And when it actually comes to Poshvin, I have gone after rogue drones in Poshvin specifically so that my standings to Edencom and Triglavians go up. So you might have seen me in previous videos where I've just been hovering about the Triglavians, and it's not a big issue for me, and that's why I can do that, because I've got positive standings to most things, and it's something that actively keeps me away from running Angels faction warfare, which is something that I'm looking at doing in the future. I've taken a little tiptoe into it, but it didn't go too well because it's kind of confusing to get where you need to go. So that's something else that needs to be looked at, is if you're making decisions that are sort of driving a narrative, I can understand that the game developers wanting it in a game sense, but another way you're locking somebody out of a lot of gameplay because they can't enter it without a hell of a lot of work. And once you start turning EVE into a second job, which I know is the running joke about EVE Online, you start seriously limiting the players who want to play the game, because if they hear that it's work, they're not going to be interested in it. And to grow a game like EVE, to grow any game, you need players that are going to be capable of dropping in and dropping out. EVE, CCP themselves said in one of the previous things, when they came out with the original abyssal structures, the abyssal drop-ins, they were actually showing that the main amount of players that log in for a day log in for about 20 minutes. So you need that circle to be able to have players come in, play a little bit and go away, as well as having the gameplay for the other ones of us, people like myself that can spend hours a week on it, and some of the hardcore guys that live in it, especially some of the retirees, because I know a few of you guys, and jeez, retirement to play another job, that's just fantastic. But at the same time, I'm not yucking on anybody's yum. You need to cater to everybody. That's my point on this. Then they've got the military campaigns designed as storytelling tools. Oh my god, my stutter is coming out today. You gotta love PTSD. Everyone has a beginning, a middle and an end. They create moments worth committing to, new outcomes worth fighting over, and histories worth remembering. This is not about simplifying war or making it safer. Now this needs paid attention to, because this statement itself comes back to some of the louder and more toxic parts of the player group, where without knowing something, without knowing the facts or how things might change, they will start screaming about it. And a perfect example, you can go back and have a look at my videos on ganking, where you can see multiple comments who haven't bothered to watch any of the video whatsoever, where they have just started screaming without knowing about it. And that sort of comes back to this. You've got these people that are very vocal, but obviously the ones that are vocal are the ones that the devs are going to hear the most. So the fact that they've just gone out there, this is not about simplifying war or making it safer, because they know what's coming, because we all know what's coming. That little sort of cry box is just going to start screaming. It's about making conflict more meaningful and consequential so that more players understand where they stand, how they can contribute, and why individual actions matter. Yes, even those new capsuleers. That's a good thing in my opinion. I think this is a very good thing for bringing people in. In my framing of it, it's also the fact that not all new capsuleers would want to come into that. So making sure that you're not making the game a war game as opposed to an open sandbox, because that's where a lot of sort of things collapse when it comes to multiplayer games, where they start focusing on one particular niche where the loudest players exist. But the loudest players, and you can go and have a look at Arc Raiders for this, the loudest players are the ones that are the most snowflakish when it comes to combat. They are very happy when they are winning, they are very crying when they are losing, and if anybody tries to affect them, they get very upset about it and scream about it online. Arc Raiders has sort of managed to beat that by having internal feedback and listening to a lot of the comments and things like that coming back, so that they are getting constant feedback that is not just the ones crying the loudest on YouTube or the ones screaming the most in the forums, where at every mission they're going, okay, we can see that that person didn't engage with any PvP. Did you like this mission? And they're like, yes or no. So they can get that instant feedback that's sort of not tainted by somebody being upset that they got absolutely wrecked for the 4th run in a row. So that's something that's good, and that's something that CCP has talked about in the past, and I think they should properly implement, because they never did in the past. They talked about getting feedback from people that were leaving the game, but I still to this day, I have no idea what the fuck was going on there, because I knew people that left the game, I knew people that cancelled their accounts and people that didn't, and none of them got emails. So I don't quite understand what was going on with that feedback, but it didn't appear to be anybody that was sort of representative of the community. I know people that were playing the game for over a decade at that point that left and cancelled accounts, which I was just aghast at. But they didn't get emails, and the people that just left, and I was part of that group because I was having a long break because of internet connections and stuff like this. Where I lived, it was just, if you don't know, British Telecom is one of the worst internet providers in the world, and I was actually linked into their, like, I couldn't choose another company, I had to be with them. So my internet speed was essentially non-existent and it was not stable. So I was in this place where I couldn't really play EVE. So they hadn't seen me log on in months, and they were going, we are surveying people that have left, and I'm sat there looking going, I've not had one. Has anybody else had one? So I contacted people, and out of 20 people, no, nobody. Going solo, you're not alone. EVE Online is a social game even when you play it alone. Breaking the barrier to social play is hard, especially for new capsuleers. For many pilots, flying solo is simply the starting point. We are going to make it a good one. Now, notice something here. I'll read through the rest of this. This year, we're focusing on giving new players, especially solo and low-confidence pilot, a clear purpose and meaningful agency from day one. Military campaigns are the foundation of that experience and a way for pilots to take on more contracts to rival empires and immediately become part of something bigger than themselves. From there, we want to gradually introduce complexity, risk and opportunity, easing players from solo play into coexistence and co-play, eventually a shared purpose. This shows a massive fucking bias that they are not fucking listening to. Some people play solo in a multiplayer environment because that's what they want. But this statement reads it as, well, they're doing it wrong. We're going to bring you into part of the whole. No! Like that has its place. That absolutely has its place, and it's completely understandable to do that. And it's well worth the goal. But the way that they're putting it down, they are not doing anything for solo players that want to remain solo players, that do not want to be part of a group, that don't want to have to deal with those people. Because we exist in a world where we have to deal with other fuckwits all of the time. The mass amount of gamers are introverted as opposed to extroverted. So you are sort of showing that you've got this bias against that thing. You're still not understanding that some people like that existence and prefer it. Gankers being a perfect example, because they can't work well with other people, or they don't want to have that extra social stress. And that's where this part of it comes in. Existing in a world online that is alive, that has other people, so it doesn't just feel like sitting on a solo player game offline, but at the same time not wanting to interact with those people. That's something that needs addressed, because it's a massive bias for CCP, and it's a massive bias just in general online. I've seen this in hundreds of comments on both my videos and on Reddit, where they say, why would you want to play a multiplayer game if you're gonna play solo? Which, transferring that comment to speak in the real world, why don't you want to deal with other people? Because I might not fucking want to. Maybe there are reasons that I don't get on with other people. Maybe, for instance, I have got trauma from dealing with other people. Maybe I've got something that's mentally different about me that means that a lot of other people don't get me. Now, for me personally, having kids that are spectrumish, to put it in an interesting way, you can see it. Sometimes you want to be in the environment, so you don't want to be alone, but you don't want to talk to other people. You don't want to have to deal with that social pressure. This is escapism. A game is escapism. And that's where I actually think it might be a case for CCP to just go out and find a couple of people within the game that are neurodivergent in a very sort of heavily spectrumed way, and hire those people as consultants to just sort of have discussions with. Maybe even give the person that's neurodivergent a Nerf gun. So when you get stuff like this, they can just shoot the boss in the face and say, no, you're being stupid, fucking listen. Because this has been a big thing throughout MMOs, where they're going, the solo players need to play with other people. No, they fucking don't. They don't want to. They don't always need to. I just realised in post exactly what this is. It's when you are made to do something with a group of kids that you didn't like at school, or you didn't interact well with at school. It is the teacher forcing you to do something. Maybe it's a kid that didn't like doing PE that was forced into doing it. Maybe it's the kid that didn't like doing the art stuff that was forced to be with the weirdo. Remember that if you are the person who we are talking about, everybody else is the weirdo. So it doesn't matter whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse. Forcing people together that don't want to interact well together is a recipe for disaster. It always has been. And it is the success that Ark is looking at right now, is that they actually went, these people want to play our games, but they don't want to play well with each other. So how do we split them into their own ways? As opposed to going, everybody needs to play the way that we want to play. And you're sat there looking at it going, do you not understand what a sandbox is? Do you not understand what made your game? This is the separate part. Everybody has their own style, and those styles should be supported. But you should never try and force players together, because every time it's happened, it's led to criticism from every group. Whether that is forcing groups in nullsec to cooperate together to have to make these big sort of alliances and clusterfucks and things like this just to maintain their space that was not liked in the first place. Whether it is forcing the guys that are in low sec into high sec so that you're pissing off one of two groups. These are the things that are, there is ways to do it that doesn't force anybody. Giving the incentive is always better than forcing somebody to play a certain way. Giving the option. Now, I imagine that this is what they're actually talking about, that they are talking about the options and things like this, but it reads very worryingly. So that's why I'm making this point, is because if you were to give an option, this is a way that you can play the game, this is the incentives for doing it, then that's a bonus for it. But if you're giving somebody a shit sandwich to eat, those incentives need to be fucking massive to get them to do it. A boss that I used to have who was ex-British Army but had never seen combat used to always be talking about this nonsense where he was like, well, you always want positive reinforcement over negative reinforcement. But he was never giving any positive reinforcement. He didn't clearly understand what it was. He was like, well, we will buy the staff a pizza so that they clean the entire office. It's like, he's talking about one pizza between 40 people. That's not an incentive. That's, some people get a slice of pizza, but they would have to stay behind for 2 hours to do more work. They're not going to do that, and they didn't. So in this aspect, it's a case of incentivizing something. Maybe you get LP, maybe you get something for it, maybe there are drivers for doing this. If you want to bring faction warfare in a big way, you need to make the reward more than the risk. And for a lot of people, especially people that are coming in and buying their credit, they're risking real money in this. So you need to adjust for that, as opposed to just forcing people together. Having this pathway is definitely a good thing, but the way this is written shows a bias that they're unaware of. So, we have already been building social tools to support this journey: corporate projects, freelance jobs, access, controlled collaboration to allow players to contribute. Now that stuff is good because, for instance, the contracts and stuff like that, you can support another corporation, you can do jobs for another corporation that might not require you interacting with that corporation. They put out a contract and say, we need so much ore, we need so many parts. Okay, that's something I can work towards. I get a reward for it. I get to play this, but I don't have to deal with those fuckwits. So that's a way of doing it that I think is very good. So there are the steps there, but it's just a slight attitude correction that is required on behalf of the developers, where these are people that are playing in a specific way, and you're insinuating that that way is wrong, but you make a fucking sandbox game. Stop that. Faction warfare and structured conflict gives players purpose and urgency and belonging. The stories that these can create, that I disagree with. I can understand why, I can understand the purpose, but at the end of the day, I've logged on a Friday night and we're going to see what's going on with the faction warfare. I've never, in any of my time playing faction warfare, seen somebody playing it publicly for the newer players that is roleplay, because that's what this is sort of describing. That is, oh, we are going to do this, because faction warfare isn't permanent changes. Now, I have a way of this being permanent changes. Start bringing in more solar systems to it. Start bringing in, like for instance, if you were going to say another solar system has been discovered, maybe it's come away from a black hole and blah blah blah, there's a whole meta reason behind it, but this is a new opportunity. Here's your faction warfare. Can they do this? Can they create this? Or Old Man Star, if you don't know the lore behind Old Man Star, go and read it, it's fantastic. But creating new gate links that will become permanent. Creating permanent changes that don't unbalance the game, but give players something that they could build within the game that will last for the rest of the game. Not, we are going to conquer all of Minmatar space, and then 6 months later all of the Chinese players are going to swap to Amatar, to the Amar race, and then they are going to conquer it all back, and they are going to do that in waves every 6 months. So nothing is permanent, everything exists. Adding more things to the game that will be permanent is that player purpose, urgency and belonging. This goes back to the very beginning of EVE. The setting up of the first station by ISS was an amazing achievement. It involved over 1,000 players at a point where the concurrent player base was less than 13,000. And it was all of us together fighting off people that were trying to control it, putting the resources in, building the actual station, getting everything down, and it was there. And it was there for years and eventually became a permanent thing. But those player bases were supposed to be that. They were supposed to exist, not just be destroyed. That was something that was sort of taken away by the way that they changed the game. And I think jump bridges might be a way of actually putting that in permanently, but also bringing new solar systems. Say for instance, a solar system is discovered in wormhole space that could be extracted to be part of the standard game map. Expanding the game map, making something permanent, having people's names attached to it, making a bit of history within the game, so that players could have their names stenciled across the gate, because that's how it exists. There's something permanent that we all want to work together. A change that will be forever in the game, not just a change that will be 30 seconds and then it comes out of it. And that's something that new players can get involved with very easily as well, because if you're forcing it through the realms of Empire combat, or even capsular combat against anti-human sort of realms, for instance, if you've got the Triglavians fighting against all of the Empires, then that's something you can bring everybody into. And you can also have the weird trolls that go on the Triglavian side and stuff like this. The war continues brewing on the ground. The stories, conflicts, persistence we all love and know, and EVE will continue and be expanded in EVE Vanguard. That I am fucking excited for. I think that's brilliant. Where player development is well underway, it's a different kind of EVE experience, but one that stays deeply connected to the universe you already know. For example, Vanguard will play a direct role in upcoming military campaigns, strengthening the bridge between ground combat and the wider conflicts shaping New Eden. Again, that could relate back into bringing things towards the map, bringing planets into the realm and all of that jazz. You could have, I mentioned this before in one of the other videos, when it comes to EVE Vanguard, you could have maps that are not just on planets, but you could also have space conflict. You could have the likes of trying to extract facilities from the Triglavians into normal space or known space for the rest of us. So there's a good link for that, and there's a lot of stuff going on that I think will be very good way of doing it, like the way that they could have done it with Dust if they hadn't just shoved it on PlayStation in the first fucking space. But yeah, so what else will Trend 2026 bring? It will bring 2 new expansions, but it will not be limited to them. In other words, we've got plans for 2, but fuck knows what else we're going to create. The year will begin with EVE Evolved in February, following a major update in March, with more updates and events landing throughout the year. Some will arrive inside expansions, others between them, and as we continue to evolve the universe in steady cadence. Now this to me kind of contradicts what they were saying before about having that plan and moving things forward. This just reads like we are going to throw a whole load of shit at the wall and see what sticks, which is sort of the standard for CCP, and is not a bad development method because you might get some things out of left field that work really well. So I think that that is a good thing to have in general, and having that flexibility is always a good thing. EVE Evolve is also a celebration of craft. Alongside gameplay updates, it brings meaningful visual and artistic refinements. Okay, they're going to pretty stuff up. The art team's hard at work. That is always a good thing. I always think that's great. Again, haulers. Bring me that fucking Triglavian hauler. I very much want to see it. It exists in game. The model is there. It's not difficult to put it into a fucking thing. And you don't need to balance it heavily. Just make it the same as the T1 haulers. Just want a new shiny ship. And I think that that's something that the art team should be rewarded with, as put this stuff in. Give more stuff. I've mentioned this before, but I've got some shiny stuff here that I have just because it's shiny, because I am that kind of ship hoarder that does like this stuff. I keep in every major hub that I've got, so where are we? Heck, Eve, Rennes, Amar, and I think Deltol. I've got one of these in each of them. For those of you that don't know this particular ship, let me just bring it up. It is the Victoria Lux. I can't pronounce that, and I can't read it that well with my eyeballs. It's the luxury yacht cruiser. So it's got a few little things. By the way, if you do own one of these, remember that they have been changed. Somebody pointed this out in the comments. They no longer are immune to interdiction. They require an interdiction nullifier module to work, because that was one of the sneaky changes that I had no idea about. Even when I was publishing a video on changes that had happened, I still didn't know this. So that interdiction nullifier is, they get a bonus for it now, but you still need that module fitted. So this thing can actually fit modules where it couldn't before.
Insufficient power.
Oh, and they've changed the power grid since the last time I had this open as well, so that's always fun. But yeah, so this is definitely one of the more interesting ships, because there's not much you can do with it aside from bopping about. But I have it because it's a shiny, because it's internet space shift and all of that jazz. By the way, F9, control F9 if you want to get rid of your stuff and just leave your ship spinning as a screensaver. So back to it. Several of New Aiden's most beloved events are returning, including Capsuleer Day, in other words the birthday. Reimagined to reflect where the universe stands today. That should be interesting, see what they can do with it. And that's the general update. Then on top of that, it just popped up there in the little thing, we have 20% off of Plex. So there are Plex sales on at the moment, as you can see here. You have these lovely little deals, Omega, Plex, etc. Which also, if you are using Dragon Marquee, or if you are not dyslexic and you're using Marquee Dragon, you can also go in and get all of the same stuff on there, but using my code you'll be able to get a 5% discount on it. So that's code Aloneinfinland, or the link that's down in the doobly-doo below. But also on top of that, by the way, this sometimes takes a bit to load, so don't worry about it, it will get there. Also, if you are in European space, then, or Australian space or anything like this, because of the fantastic stuff that the American government is doing and sinking their own currency, you will also get a discount from euros or Australian dollars to dollars. So instead of spending your money in euros directly with CCP, you would be spending your money that would be translated to dollars, saving you somewhere between 10 and 20% depending on the day. Then you've got my discount code, which is another 5%, and then actually paying for it in the dollars. So you would be saving somewhere between 15 and 25% in some cases between all of the, before any of the sale stuff starts to kick in. So please bear that in mind. Anything you're doing through me is always a little bit of a help for me, and that's always needed, thank you. Also, by the way, I do have Patreon and coffee and any of that stuff if you enjoy these weird and wonderful rants. But yeah, don't feel like you have to. Just, if you are somebody with far too much money, it's far better that it goes to me than to your addiction to whatever strange stuff you deserve. Those of you that have the cling film thing, that's weird. That is weird. I wouldn't yuck on someone's yum, but that's weird. Just know that. So yeah, that's sort of where we are at. There is an interesting amount of stuff going on with CCP. They are paying attention now in strange and unusual ways, and I would like to highlight some of the blind spots. And I know that other YouTubers are in the same mind. Some other YouTubers are in the same mind. And bear in mind, those of us that are in a situation where we are not directly sponsored by CCP don't have that sort of beholden to us, because a lot of people, especially as part of the partner program, there is a limit on how much negative stuff you could say before you are affected by that. I and a few other people do not have that particular limitation, which is why this isn't really propaganda. It's an actual honest opinion that's unbiased. With that all being said, I'm Alone in Finland. If you have not watched the Arc Raiders videos, please go and watch them, especially the one to do with how they solve cheating, because it is something that will become very relevant in both Vanguard and also in EVE Online. Hopefully this is going to be quite a good thing. I think it's a lot of interesting stuff that they're acknowledging and putting out there, and I do think that that little mining update was a big shock to them. They've gone, hey shit, maybe there's a possibility here. And more recently, when it comes to the team that's doing Vanguard, and them having said that they're actually paying attention to Arc Raiders, because they're not dissimilar games. They're paying attention to what's good, what's bad. And when you're looking at, if you have a look at Arc Raiders, the amount of YouTubers that are playing the PvE side, you'll see a different perspective. But also, if you have a look at the heavy PvP focused ones, you'll see that people fucking despise the rats. That is anybody that is ganking, to use the EVE term. People despise them. Even the PvP players despise them. So the fact that they are sort of, those are the type of players that were ruining the game, is bringing a lot of focus, especially to other game developers that are looking at that and going, oh shit, they managed to address that problem and it surged their player base. So how do we address it? So that'd be the final thoughts and stuff like this. Thanks for watching, thanks for all that jazz. Links down below, comments as usual please, and for everybody that has subscribed and left comments and stuff like that, good or bad or otherwise, I thank you for your stuff, because that has been very nice, and you are helping my brain as much as I am trying to help the community, or far more than I am trying to help the community. I don't feel like this is deserved, but I am very appreciative. So thanks for your time and all of that jazz. Let's see what's going on. And if you are a weird and wonderful ship collector, please put down below what is your favourite ship. I am very interested in stuff like this. And I put it at the end of the video so that I know who is actually putting it in. Because you guys are weird. And I love it. Because I'm weird too. So, thanks. Bye!